gardeners, welcome back to another video on my channel. I'm Trisha for those of you that aren't familiar. So welcome to the channel if you're new. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how to properly upgrade your animal to a larger enclosure, because there are many different tips and tricks that are involved with this. And it also kind of depends on the animal that you're upgrading as well. So I'm going to go over all of it today. Hopefully this will give you more insight when you're upgrading your reptile, no matter what kind of reptile it is. And yeah, hopefully this will be helpful. Also, Chacho is just going to be popping in and out because that's what he does. So the number one tip when you're upgrading any type of reptile into a new larger enclosure is to supply a lot of hiding places. So again, this kind of depends on the animal that you're keeping. If you're keeping a ball python, obviously you should have a warm and a cool hide. But if you're keeping a crested gecko, they aren't really animals that require hides. But when I say hides, they should have like areas, whether it's like cork bark or just foliage, different things in the enclosure, something that they can hide in, because if they feel overly stressed, they want to be able to hide and get away. It's just any reptile's natural instinct is to get away and just hide away, so that way they feel safe and not exposed to any dangers. So those hiding places will really help your reptile to get adjusted into that new home, no matter what type of reptile it's going to be. So yeah, number one tip, definitely provide hides no matter what type of animal it is. And number two is basically just goes along with number one, and that is to supply a lot of foliage and coverage, which basically just functions as another form of a hide. But if you're keeping a ball python and you already have your cool and your warm hide, it's great to add a lot of foliage into that enclosure, especially if you're putting them in a large tank. Especially for ball pythons, because a lot of them do come from racking systems, and a lot of people say you shouldn't upgrade them into a larger enclosure like a tank or anything like that, because it's just way too much exposure for them, and that's why they get stressed out and they end up not eating and they just are way overly stressed. So the way to actually deal with this situation, because ball pythons, in my opinion, they should have the extra amount of space. They will utilize it as long as they feel safe and secure in their enclosure. But the way to help ease that process is to supply, again, the two hides, the warm and the cool hide, and then tons of foliage and plants within the enclosure for them to feel safe as they move through the entire enclosure. That way they always have a place to hide in and get away from people. And then again, for like the crested geckos or any type of gecko, again, that foliage is just going to function, make the animal feel safer throughout the entire enclosure, because they have many opportunities to hide and get away and not feel exposed, because that is the number one stressor with reptiles. They just want to be away from human contact, especially if it's a new enclosure. So it's just something to keep an eye out for. Definitely add lots of foliage, fake plants, live plants, cork bark, whatever the case may be. All of those things work great for hides. Number three is to keep a routine. So by keeping a routine, your animal is going to start to learn how things work. You may already have your routine with your animal and you're just upgrading their enclosure, so it's not going to be too much of a difference, but it is a new environment for them. So you just want to keep that routine going. It's just going to help them along and feel adjusted in their new enclosure with you and everything that's happening around them. So when I talk about routine, I'm talking about feeding, the way that you approach them when you feed them, misting. Try and do everything at the same time. So like if you're going to be misting at nighttime, make sure you're always doing it around the same time at night. Don't just go in and just do anything new with your animal. Basically, you just want to keep a very strict routine, especially during that first week when they're adjusting to that new environment. Number four is literally just to leave your reptile alone once you put them in the new enclosure. So give them a few days to adjust. Don't try to handle them or anything. A lot of animals aren't going to be eating, so you shouldn't be trying to do that. I mean, you can, it's totally up to you, but if your animal doesn't eat, it's not that big of a deal. But you shouldn't be handling them whatsoever, especially during that first week. Let them adjust to their new surroundings. You want to just decrease the amount of stress that they have, and handling them can just cause them more stress and they aren't going to adjust well to their new enclosure. So just give them time. You got to be patient. It's really, really hard for people that are just bringing home a new reptile for the first time, because all they want to do is hold it, interact with it, take pictures of it. And you can't do that. You just got to give them time to adjust, because it's going to be better for them in the long run. Number five is to just treat it as a test run. So the number one way to know if your reptile is actually adjusted or adjusting well to the new enclosure is if they eat. So this again depends on you. You can try and feed them right away. I would recommend not to. Give them a couple of days. If it's a snake, absolutely don't feed them or touch them for a week. They need that time to adjust to their new surroundings, and you don't want to overstress them. Some people end up still feeding their animals and they eat, which is a great sign, which means they're adjusting well. But if your animal isn't eating for an extensive amount of time and you're starting to get worried, then it may be time to check your husbandry. Make sure that the temperature, the humidity is on point. If all of those things are in check and your animal still is not adjusting to the larger enclosure, then it may be time just to downgrade them again. This happens very often with crested geckos. They're kind of the most tricky to upgrade because especially the baby crested geckos, they do take a while to grow. And normally for any reptile, like I would suggest, like people are always asking, like, can I just get a large enclosure for my ball python right off the bat? That way I don't have to keep spending money and doing little upgrades over time. People ask the same thing with veiled chameleons, bearded dragons. I would always just say to go big right off the bat because you will be saving money as long as those animals will adjust well and you add all of that foliage and hides and everything. They should be perfectly fine, especially like a chameleon or a bearded dragon, because they grow so quickly that they will grow into that enclosure within a matter of a few months anyway. So it's really not that big of a deal just to go and get the largest enclosure possible. But for crested geckos, that's not really something that you should be doing for a baby because the babies typically have a very hard time adjusting to a large enclosure and they have a hard time finding their food. They may feel overstressed and not have enough foliage so they don't eat. So that's the type of reptile where you really need to just treat this whole process like a test run. You need to see what they can handle because it's not the same because every single crested gecko is its own individual. This goes for gargoyle geckos as well. So you really need to just see how they do with it and give them time. And if they still aren't eating, you're adding all the foliage, you're doing everything properly, then just put them in a smaller enclosure until they get bigger and then try and upgrade them again. It's just a complete trial and error process with each individual crested or gargoyle gecko that's a baby because they're all so different and they adjust to things so differently. So that's my advice on that. Any other kind of reptile that's going to get big, I really don't think there's anything wrong with getting a large enclosure and putting them in it. You just want to be checking that you're following all of these steps and that they're still eating. If they aren't adjusting to their new enclosure, it may be best just to downsize again. And if they aren't adjusting to the downsize, maybe it may be time to seek medical attention just to make sure your animal is healthy. So I know this is a lot of information. I hope that this was helpful in some way. It is a little bit different with each different type of reptile. For the most part, upgrading enclosures is one of the best things you could do for your animals. They will appreciate it if it's done the right way. Again, I cannot stress enough how important foliage and hides are. Even for enrichment, like it's just better for your reptile in every single way, and it's going to make them feel safe and secure, have new touches and feels and smells. So yeah, I hope that this was helpful. If you guys have any other tips regarding upgrading enclosures, please go ahead and leave it in a comment and help everyone else out. I really appreciate it when you guys let me know what you think. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.